Sayer Sharks, this is Mrs. Karrick here. Today I'm going to read a book to you. It's one of my favorites. It's called Enemy Pie. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a tree house in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 weeks. And I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved in as my neighbor. He was right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when I struck out in baseball. He had a party on his trampoline and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the only person on my enemy list. I've never had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood things like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had had enemies too. But he knew of a really good way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled out a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted. Enemy pie, he said, very satisfied. You may be wondering what enemy pie really is. Well, I was wondering. But Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kind of things, what kind of disgusting things would be put into an enemy pie? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him some earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think that would help either. I gave him some gum I'd been chewing all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me, and all the while I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and cutting and blending all of the ingredients to the enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all, I thought. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was very confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell so good. But Dad was smart. Well, if enemies smell bad things, they're not going to eat it. The buzzer rang, and Dad put on an oven mitt and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like plain old pie to me. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on, but still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly would it do to my enemies? Maybe it would make their hair fall out, or maybe it would make their breath stinky, or maybe it would make my bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part to the enemy pie that I can't do, said Dad. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with all this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It sounded scary. But it was worth a try. All I had to do was to spend the day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and I knocked on his door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys stay out of trouble now, she said. We rode bikes for a while. We played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them right at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with this enemy. He almost seemed nice, but of course I couldn't tell my dad that, since he'd worked so hard on that enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to me. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in, can we go in? He asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was at the top, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said. But hold on just a minute. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended that we didn't hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him. But somehow, he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about this enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut it into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and tried to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates, side by side, with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at that point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I saved his life. I was his hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why is your dad already eating his pie? He's eaten half of it. I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating the enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat the enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating. And neither of them were losing their hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny bite. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I wonder if enemies really do hate it. I wonder if their hair falls out. I wonder if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get the answer, because I just lost my best enemy. And that's it for Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. I hope you enjoyed it.